Chapter 2 of Love Insurance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Love Insurance by Earl Derr Biggers. Chapter 2 An Evening in the River. Though San Marco is a particularly gaudy tassel on the fringe of the tourists' south, it was to the north that Mr. Richard Minnick first turned. 1 hour later, he made his appearance amid the gold braid and dignity of the plaza lobby. The young man behind the desk, an exquisite creature done in Charles Dana Gibbs's best manner, knew when to be affable. He also knew when not to be affable. Upon Mr. Minnick, he turned the cold, fishy stare he kept for such as were not guests under his charge. "What is your business with Lord Harrowby?" he inquired suspiciously. "Since when," asked Mr. Minnick brightly, "have you been in his lordship's confidence?" This was the young man's cue to wince, but hotel clerks are notoriously poor wincers. "It is customary," he began in perfect poise. "I know," said Mr. Minnick, "but then I'm a sort of a friend of his lordship." "A sort of a friend?" How well he lifted his eyebrows. "Something like that. I believe I'm to be best man at his wedding." Ah, yes, the splendid young man knew when to be affable. Affability swamped him now. "Boy," he cried, "take this gentleman's card to Lord Harrowby." A bellboy in a Zenda uniform accepted the card, laid it upon a silver tray, glued it down with a large New York thumb, and strayed off down gilded corridors shouting, "Lord Harrowby!" Whereat all the pretty little debutantes who happened to be decorating the scene at the moment felt their pampered hearts go pit-a-pat, and closing their eyes, saw visions and dreamed dreams. Lord Harrowby was at luncheon, and sent word for Mr. Minnick to join him. Entering the gay dining room, Minnick saw at the far end the blonde and noble head he sought. He threaded his way between the tables. Although he was an unusually attractive young man, he had never experienced anything like the array of stares turned upon him as he had gone 10 feet. "What the devil's the matter?" he asked himself. "I seem to be the cynosure of neighboring eyes, and then some." He did not dream that it was because he was passing through a dining room of democrats to grasp the hand of a lord. "My dear fellow, I'm delighted, I assure you." Really, Lord Harrowby's face should have paid closer attention to his words. Just now it failed ignominiously in the matter of backing them up. "Thank you," Mr. Minnick replied. "Your lordship is no doubt surprised at seeing me so soon. Well, not at all. Shall I order luncheon?" "No, thanks. I had a bite on the way up." And Mr. Minnick dropped into the chair which an eager waiter held ready. "Lord Harrowby, I trust you are not going to be annoyed by what I have to tell you." His lordship's face clouded, and worry entered the mild blue eyes. "I hope there's nothing wrong about the policy." "Nothing whatever, Lord Harrowby. Mr. Jephson trusts you implicitly." "So I perceived this morning. I was deeply touched." "It was, touching." Minnick smiled a bit cynically. "Understanding, as you do, how Mr. Jephson feels toward you, you will realize that it is in no sense a reflection on you that our office, viewing this matter in a purely business light, has decided that someone must go to San Marco with you. Someone who will protect Mr. Jephson's interests. "Your office," said his lordship, reflecting. "You mean Mr. Thacker, don't you?" Could it be that the fellow was not so slow as he seemed? "Mr. Thacker is the head of our office," smiled Mr. Minute. "It has been thought best that someone go with you, Lord Harrowby, someone who will work night and day to see to it that Miss Merrick does not change her mind. I am the someone. I hope you are not annoyed." "My dear chap, not in the least. When I said this morning that I was quite set on this marriage, I was frightfully sincere." And now his lordship's face, frank and boyish, in nowise belied his words. "I shall be deeply grateful for any aid Lloyd's can give me, and I am already grateful that Lloyd's has selected you to be my ally." "Really very decent of him," Dick Minute bowed. "You go south tonight," he ventured. "Yes, on the yacht Lilith, belonging to my friend Mr. Martin Wall. You have heard of him?" "No, I can't say that I have." "Indeed, I understood he was very well known here. A big, bluff, hearty chap. We met on the steamer coming over, and became very good friends." A pause. "You will enjoy meeting Mr. Wall," said his lordship meaningly, "when I introduce you to him in San Marco." "Lord Harrowby," said Minute slowly, "my instructions are to go south with you on the yacht." For a moment the two men stared into each other's eyes. Then Lord Harrowby pursed his thin lips and gazed out at Fifth Avenue, gay and colorful in the February sun. "How extremely unfortunate," he drawled. "It is not my boat, Mr. Minute. If it were, nothing could give me greater pleasure than to extend an invitation to you." "I understand," said Minute, "but I am to go, invited or uninvited." "In my interests?" asked Harrowby sarcastically. "As the personal conductor of the bridegroom, Mr. Minute, really. I have no wish to be rude, Lord Harrowby, but it is our turn to be a little fantastic now. Could anything be more fantastic than boarding a yacht uninvited? But Miss Merrick, on whom, after all, Mr. Jephson's fate depends, is already in Florida, with her lamp trimmed and burning. How sad, your lordship, if some untoward event should interfere with the coming of the bridegroom. I perceive," smiled Lord Harrowby, "that you do not share Mr. Jephson's confidence in my motives. This is New York, and a business proposition. Every man in New York is considered guilty until he proves himself innocent, and then we move for a new trial." "Nevertheless," Lord Harrowby's mouth hardened, "I must refuse to ask you to join me on the Lilith. Would you mind telling me where the boat is anchored?" "Somewhere in the North River, I believe. I don't know, really." "You don't know? Won't it be a bit difficult, boarding a yacht when you don't know where to find it?" "My dear chap," began Harrowby angrily. "No matter." Mr. Minute stood up. "I'll say au revoir, Lord Harrowby, until tonight, or until we meet in San Marco." Lord Harrowby regained his good nature. "I'm extremely sorry to be so impolite, but I believe we're going to be very good friends nonetheless." "We're going to be very close to each other at any rate," Minute smiled. "Once more, au revoir, your lordship." "Pardon me, good-bye," answered Lord Harrowby with decision. And Richard Minute was again threading his way between odd tables. Walking slowly down Fifth Avenue, Mr. Minute was forced to admit that he had not made a very auspicious beginning in his new role. Why had Lord Harrowby refused so determinedly to invite him aboard the yacht that was to bear the eager bridegroom south? And what was he to do now? Might he not discover where the yacht lay, board it at dusk, and conceal himself in a vacant cabin until the party was well underway? It sounded fairly simple, but it proved otherwise. He was balked from the outset. For 2 hours in the library of his club, in telephone booths and elsewhere, he sought for some tangible evidence of the existence of a wealthy American named Martin Wall and a yacht called the Lilith. City directories and yacht club yearbooks alike were silent. Myth, myth, myth ran through Dick Minnett's mind. Was Lord Harrowby, as they say at the Gaiety, spoofing him? He mounted to the top of a bus and was churned up Riverside Drive. Along the banks of the river lay dozens of yachts, dismantled, swathed in winter coverings. Among the few that appeared ready to sail, his keen eye discerned no Lilith. Somewhat discouraged, he returned to his club and startled a waiter by demanding dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon. Going then to his rooms, he exchanged his overcoat for a sweater, his hat for a golf cap. At 5:30, a spy for the first time in his eventful young life, he stood opposite the main entrance of the plaza. Near by ticked a taxi, engaged for the evening. An hour passed. Lights, laughter, limousines, the cold moon adding its brilliance to that already brilliant square, the winter wind sighing through the bare trees of the park. New York seemed a city of dreams. Suddenly the chauffeur of Minnett's taxi stood uneasily before him. "Say, you ain't going to shoot anybody, are you?" he asked. "Oh, no, you needn't be afraid of that." "I ain't afraid. I just thought I'd take off my license number if you was." Ah, yes, New York, city of beautiful dreams. Another hour slipped by, and only the little taximeter was busy, winking mechanically at the unresponsive moon. At 8:15, a tall blond man, in a very expensive fur coat, which impressed even the cab starter, came down the steps of the hotel. He ordered a limousine and was whirled away to the west. At 8:15 and a half, Mr. Minette followed. Lord Harrowby's car proceeded to the drive and, turning, sped north between the moonlit river and the manlit apartment houses. In the neighborhood of 110th Street, it came to a stop, and as Minette's car passed slowly by, he saw his lordship standing in the moonlight, paying his chauffeur. Hastily dismissing his own car, he ran back in time to see Lord Harrowby disappear down one of the store stairways into the gloom of the park that skirts the Hudson. He followed. On and on down the steps and bare wind-swept paths he hurried, until finally the river, cold, silvery, serene, lay before him. Some 30 yards from shore, he beheld the lights of a yacht flashing against the gloomy background of Jersey. A Lilith! He watched Lord Harrowby cross the railroad tracks to a small landing, and leap from that into a boat in charge of a solitary rower. Then he heard the soft swish of oars, and watched the boat draw away from shore. He stood there in the shadow until he had seen his lordship bring up the accommodation ladder to the Lilith's deck. He too must reach the Lilith, and at once. But how? He glanced quickly up and down the bank. A small boat was tethered nearby. He ran to it, but a chain and padlock held it firmly. He must hurry. Dancing impatiently on the bosom of Henrik Hudson's important discovery, he recognized the preparations for an early departure. Minute stood for a moment, looking at the wide, wet river. It was February, yes, but February of the mildest winter New York had experienced in years. At the seashore, he had always dashed boldly in, while others stood on the sands and shivered. He dashed in now. The water was cold, shockingly cold. He struck out swiftly for the yacht. Fortunately, the accommodation ladder had not yet been taken up. In another moment he was clinging, a limp and dripping spectacle, to the rail of the Lilith. Happily, that side of the deck was just then deserted. A row of outside cabin doors in the bow met Minute's eye. Stealthily, he swished toward them. And in the last analysis, the only thing between him and them proved to be a large, commanding gentleman, whose silhouette was particularly militant, and whose whole bearing was unfavorable. "Mr. Wall, I presume?" said Minute through noisy teeth. "Correct," said the gentleman. His voice was sharp, unfriendly. But the moonlight, falling on his face, revealed it as soft, genial, pudgy, the inviting sort of countenance to which, under the melting influences of Scotch and soda, one feels like relating the sad story of one's wasted life. Though soaked and quaking, Mr. Minute aimed at nonchalance. "Well," he said, "you might be good enough to tell Lord Harrowby that I've arrived." "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm a friend of his lordship. He'll be delighted, I'm sure. Just tell him, if you'll be so kind." "Did he invite you aboard?" "Not exactly, but he'll be glad to see me, especially if you mention just one word to him." "What word?" Mr. Minute leaned airily against the rail. "Lloyd's," he said. An expression of mingled rage and dismay came into the pudgy face. It purpled in the moonlight. Its huge owner came threateningly toward the dripping Minute. "Back into the river for you," he said savagely, almost lovingly, so it might have seemed to the casual observer. He wound his thick arms about the dripping Minute. Up and down the deck they turkey-trotted. "Over the rail and into the river," breathed Mr. Wall on Minute's damp neck. Two large and capable sailormen came at the sound of the struggle. "Here, boys," Wall shouted, "help me toss this guy over." Willing hands seized Minute at opposite poles. 1, 2, counted the sailorman. "Well, good night, Mr. Wall," remarked Minute. 3. A splash, and he was ingloriously in the cold river again. He turned to the accommodation ladder, but quick hands drew it up. Evidently there was nothing to do but return once more to little old New York. He rested for a minute, treading water, seeing dimly the tall homes of the cave-dwellers, and over them the yellow glare of Broadway. Then he struck out. When he reached the shore and turned, the Lilith was already underway, moving slowly down the silver path of the moon. An old man was launching the padlocked rowboat. "Great night for a swim," he remarked sarcastically. "Lovely," chattered Minute. "Say, do you know anything about the yacht that's just steamed out?" "Not as much as I'd like her. Used to belong to a man in Chicago. Yesterday the caretaker told me she'd been rented for the winter. Seen him tonight in a gin mill with money to throw to the birds. Looks funny to me." "Thanks. Man came this afternoon and painted out her old name. Changed it to the Lilith. Mighty suspicious." "What was the old name?" "The Lady Evelyn. If If I was you, I'd get outside, drink, and quick. Good night." As Minute dashed up the bank, he heard the swish of the old man's oars behind. He ran all the way to his rooms, and after a hot bath and the liquid refreshment suggested by the waterman, called Mr. Thacker on the telephone. "Well, Richard?" that gentleman inquired. "Sad news. Little Cupid's had a setback, tossed into the Hudson when he tried to board the yacht that is taking Lord Harrowby south." "No, is that so?" Mr. Thacker's tone was contemplative. "Well, Richard, the Palm Beach special leaves at midnight. Better be on it. Better go down and help the bride with her trousseau." "Yes, sir, I'll do that. And I'll see to it that she has her lamp trimmed and burning. Considering that her father's in the oil business, that ought not to be—" "I can't hear you, Richard. What are you saying?" "Nothing, Mr. Thacker. Look up a yacht called the Lady Evelyn. Chicago man, I think. Find out if he's rented it, and to whom. It's the boat Harrowby went south on." "All right, Richard. Goodbye, my boy. Write me whenever you need money." "Perhaps I can't write as often as that, but I'll send you bulletins from time to time." "I depend on you, Richard. Jeffson must not lose. Leave it to me. The Palm Beach special at midnight, and after that, Miss Cynthia Merrick." End of chapter 2.